A woman like you doesn't drive a car like this on her wedding day unless somebody handed her the wrong keys. The sentence cut through the morning air before the church bells could finish ringing. Naomi Brooks stood beside the white vintage Mercedes with one hand still resting on the chrome door handle, her veil trembling in the warm Georgia breeze, her bouquet lying on the passenger seat beside a folder of court papers she had not yet had time to remove. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The photographer lowered his camera. The bridesmaids froze halfway up the stone steps. Marcus Reed, waiting near the church entrance in his navy suit, turned as the police cruiser rolled to a stop at the curb with its lights flashing against the stained glass windows. Officer Caleb Whitmore stepped out slowly, polished boots touching the pavement like he owned every inch of it. His uniform was sharp, his jaw tight, his eyes already decided before he asked a single question. He looked at Naomi's dress first, then at the car, then at her face, and the silence that followed felt colder than the air-conditioned courtroom she had left only an hour earlier. "Step away from the vehicle," he said. Naomi blinked once. "Officer, this is my car." Caleb gave a small laugh, not loud enough to be honest, just loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. "Of course it is." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Naomi felt the heat of the asphalt through the thin soles of her wedding shoes, felt the weight of every phone rising in the hands of strangers across the street. She reached carefully into the open car door and pulled out the registration. "My name is Naomi Brooks. The title, insurance, and registration are all in the glove compartment. You're welcome to verify them." Caleb did not take the paper. His eyes flicked to the gold bracelet on her wrist, then to the hood ornament gleaming in the sunlight. "We received a call about a stolen luxury vehicle matching this description." "From who?" Naomi asked, her voice calm enough to make the question sound heavier than anger. Caleb's expression hardened. "That is not your concern." Marcus started down the steps. "Naomi." Another officer lifted one hand, stopping him without touching him. Naomi looked toward her fiancé, and in that one glance she told him not to move, not to give them the picture they were waiting for. The church doors stood open behind him, full of flowers, soft music, and people who had come to watch her walk toward a future she had fought to believe in. Caleb stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, don't make this difficult." Naomi straightened, the lace at her sleeves catching the light. "Asking for probable cause is not making it difficult." The body camera on Caleb's chest blinked red. She noticed it. So did he. "I am asking you to check the registration before you turn a wedding into a crime scene." Caleb's mouth tightened. He reached for the paper at last, glanced at it for less than a second, then folded it against his palm as if it meant nothing. "This doesn't prove you didn't take it." The words landed harder than the siren. Naomi heard her mother gasp somewhere behind the bridesmaids. She heard the photographer whisper, "Keep recording." Caleb moved to stand between Naomi and the Mercedes, blocking her from the car, from the bouquet, from the aisle, from the life waiting 10 yards away. "Put your hands where I can see them." Naomi slowly lifted both hands, palms open, veil brushing her shoulder. "Officer Whitmore," she said, reading the name on his badge, "you are making a mistake." His eyes narrowed at the sound of his name. Funny. People always say that right before the truth comes out. Naomi looked directly into the body camera now, her voice steady enough to quiet even the birds in the oak trees above the church lawn. "Then let the truth come out. Start with the registration. Start with the call. Start with why a black bride standing beside her own car looked like a suspect before she even spoke." For the first time, Caleb hesitated. Not long. Just a flicker. Then he reached for the cuffs on his belt, the metal catching the morning sun, and the crowd seemed to breathe in all at once. Marcus said her name again, this time softer, broken at the edges. Naomi did not look away from Caleb. Her wedding dress glowed white against the dark side of the cruiser. The bells rang once more above them, solemn and slow, as if the church itself understood that something sacred was being interrupted. Caleb stepped behind her and said, "You're coming with me." And while the camera kept recording, while her bouquet waited untouched in the passenger seat, Naomi Brooks lowered her hands with dignity, knowing that the man arresting her had no idea whose courtroom he would be standing in before the day was over. Naomi had learned years ago that dignity was not something the world handed you. Sometimes it was the only thing left when the world tried to take everything else. As Officer Caleb Whitmore guided her toward the cruiser, She kept her shoulders straight, not because she was unafraid, but because fear had never been allowed to make decisions for her. The pavement beneath her shoes was already warm, the kind of late morning heat that rose in waves from the street and made the white paint of the church steps shimmer. Behind her, Marcus was speaking fast now, controlled but shaken, asking for badge numbers, asking who had made the call, asking why no one had even checked the vehicle identification number. Naomi heard him, and hearing him almost broke her calm, because this was not the morning they had planned. By now, she was supposed to be hidden in the bridal room, laughing with her mother while someone fixed the tiny pearl pins in her hair. By now, the choir was supposed to be warming up. By now, her father's old cuff links, the ones she had sewn into the inside of her bouquet ribbon, were supposed to be resting against her palm as she walked down the aisle. Her father would not be there to walk beside her. He had passed away 3 winters earlier, still carrying the quiet damage of a case that should never have taken 20 years to clear. Naomi had been 12 when she first saw him in a courthouse hallway, wearing a county jail uniform too large for his thin frame, while a white officer pointed at him and called him dangerous in front of strangers. She remembered the smell of floor polish, the buzz of fluorescent lights, the way her mother squeezed her hand so tightly her fingers went numb. That day, Naomi did not understand statutes, evidence, or procedure. She only understood that a lie sounded stronger when it came from someone with a badge. So she studied. She read law books in the public library until the security guard reminded her it was closing. She worked nights in college, cleaned offices in the summer, tutored freshmen, and passed the bar while still grieving the man the system had finally admitted it had failed. She became the kind of attorney people called when nobody else would listen, the kind who sat with mothers in courthouse bathrooms, the kind who knew that justice was not a marble building or a black robe. Justice was whether anyone bothered to see the person standing in front of them. That was why Caleb's voice did not surprise her. The tone was older than him. It had lived in traffic stops, apartment leasing offices, school board meetings, emergency rooms, and courtrooms where people like Naomi were expected to prove they belonged before they were allowed to breathe. He opened the rear door of the cruiser, and the smell of vinyl, stale coffee, and sun-baked plastic rolled out. Naomi glanced back once. Her mother stood near the church steps with both hands pressed to her mouth, her lavender dress trembling in the breeze. Marcus had stopped moving, but his eyes had not left Naomi's face. She gave him the smallest nod she could manage, not permission, not surrender, but a promise. Do not let this make you forget who I am. Caleb noticed the exchange and gave a thin smile. You two can finish the ceremony after we clear this up, assuming everything checks out. Naomi turned her head slowly. Everything already checks out. You chose not to see it. The words were quiet, but several guests heard them. Caleb's jaw flexed. Watch your tone. Naomi looked at the body camera again, the little red light blinking like a heartbeat. My tone is not the evidence. For a moment, only the church bells spoke. Then Caleb closed the cruiser door with Naomi inside, leaving her veil caught for half a second in the frame before she gently pulled it free. The lace settled across her lap like a fallen flag. Through the glass, she watched her wedding bouquet sitting in the Mercedes, white roses tipped with gold ribbon, still waiting for a bride the street had decided to turn into a suspect. She inhaled slowly, counting the way her law professor had taught her before oral arguments. For seconds in. Hold. For seconds out. Outside, Caleb lifted Naomi's registration again and finally looked at the name printed across the top. Naomi Brooks. He stared at it longer this time, but not long enough to understand what it meant. Caleb Whitmore had grown up believing certain doors opened because his family name arrived before he did. In Millhaven County, people did not just know Judge Harold Whitmore. They lowered their voices when they said his name. Harold had spent 32 years on the bench, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, the kind of man whose portrait still hung in the courthouse lobby, even though half the town knew the retirement had not been his choice. Caleb had married Harold's daughter, Clara, 7 years earlier in a country club ceremony where judges, sheriffs, donors, and prosecutors smiled beneath crystal chandeliers and spoke about legacy as if it were a birthright. From that day forward, Caleb moved through the police department with an invisible shield. Supervisors called him dependable. Older officers called him connected. People who filed complaints learned quickly that paperwork could disappear into drawers and phone calls could go unanswered. Caleb was not the loudest man in uniform, and that made him more dangerous in a quieter way. He rarely shouted. He did not need to. His confidence came polished, clipped, and procedural, wrapped in phrases like routine stop, suspicious circumstance, and officer discretion. Sitting behind the wheel of the cruiser now, he glanced at Naomi through the rearview mirror and saw what he expected to see, a woman dressed far above what he had already decided she was. Her veil covered one shoulder. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. She was not pleading, and that bothered him more than panic would have. People usually tried to explain themselves to him. They rushed their words. They softened their voices. They became smaller. Naomi did not shrink. She looked out the window at the church steps as though she were memorizing the scene for testimony. Caleb looked down at the registration again. Naomi Brooks. The name tugged at something in his mind, faint but irritating, like a song he did not want to recognize. He had heard Clara mention a Brooks once the night before, while standing in their kitchen with a glass of iced tea sweating on the marble counter. Clara had been angry, pacing barefoot across the tile, saying her father deserved better than to be pushed aside by political theater and federal pressure. Caleb had not listened closely. He rarely listened when Clara talked about courthouse politics. To him, the courts were Harold's kingdom, and kingdoms did not truly fall. They only paused until the right people fixed the problem. Now the name sat in his hand, black ink on white paper, and he still refused to connect it to anything that mattered. Outside the cruiser, the second officer was speaking with Marcus, keeping his tone polite but firm while guests gathered in uneasy clusters. The photographer stood near the curb with his camera lowered but still recording from his chest rig. Naomi's mother remained on the steps, lips moving in a prayer so silent it seemed to disappear into the heat. Caleb opened his door and stepped out, carrying Naomi's registration like an inconvenience. He walked toward the Mercedes and circled it slowly, touching nothing at first, letting the performance stretch. He checked the license plate. He checked the vehicle identification number through the windshield. He radioed dispatch with the numbers, then waited. The reply came back clean. Registered owner, Naomi Elaine Brooks. Insurance active. No theft report. No warrant. No alert. For one thin second, Caleb's face changed. Not regret. Not shame. Calculation. A decent man would have opened the cruiser door right then. A decent man would have apologized before the whole church and let the bride return to the life he had interrupted. Caleb didn't either. He turned away from the watching guests and lowered his voice into the radio, asking dispatch to recheck, then to search for related reports, then to verify whether the vehicle had been transferred recently. Each request sounded official enough to hide what it really was. Delay. Control. Pride. Naomi watched through the glass, and the old courthouse hallway returned to her memory, not as pain this time, but as instruction. Men like Caleb did not fear being wrong. They feared being seen being wrong. He came back to the cruiser and leaned slightly toward the closed window. Looks like there may be some confusion in the system, he said. Naomi met his eyes through the reflection of her own veil. The system is clear. You are the confusion. The words did not rise above a calm, speaking voice, but they reached him. His expression hardened in a way that made the air inside the cruiser feel smaller. You are going to the station until we sort this out. Then sort it with the body camera running, Naomi said, and preserve every second. Caleb stood there a moment longer, the red light on his chest blinking between them. Behind him, the church bell stopped. The silence that followed felt intentional, like the whole street was waiting for someone to decide what kind of truth this day would become. The cruiser pulled away from the church at 10 miles under the speed limit, slow enough for every guest to watch Naomi disappear behind tinted glass. Caleb drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the radio, his posture stiff, his silence louder than the siren he had chosen not to use. Naomi sat upright in the back, the lace of her dress gathered carefully around her knees, her veil now folded over one shoulder like something sacred she refused to let the moment ruin. Through the partition, she could see the back of Caleb's head, the tight line of his neck, the way he kept glancing at her in the mirror as if expecting tears, panic, or an apology for making his morning inconvenient. She gave him none of those. Instead, she studied the inside of the cruiser with the steady attention of someone entering evidence into memory. The cracked edge of the plastic seat, the smell of coffee and dashboard heat, the small camera mounted near the windshield. The time on the digital clock. 11:26 in the morning. Her wedding was scheduled for 11:30. Caleb cleared his throat. You seem calm for someone being detained. Naomi looked at his reflection. I have spent enough time in courtrooms to know calm is not the same as consent. The words sat between them, clean and sharp. Caleb's jaw moved as if he had bitten into something bitter. You keep talking like you are the one in charge. No, Naomi said. I am talking like I know my rights. The radio crackled with routine traffic updates, a shoplifting call 3 blocks away, a stalled pickup on Route 17, ordinary problems in an ordinary town pretending this moment was ordinary too. Naomi turned her wrist slightly, feeling the cuffs press against the delicate seam of her sleeve. They were not painfully tight, but they were unnecessary, and that mattered. Every unnecessary thing mattered. Officer Whitmore, she said, her voice even. I am requesting that you state on camera the legal reason for taking me to the station after dispatch confirmed the vehicle was registered to me. Caleb gave a short exhale. We are verifying ownership. Ownership was verified. There are still questions. Then name the questions. He did not answer. The road curved past a row of crepe myrtles, their pink blossoms bright against the summer green. Naomi watched them blur by and thought of her mother standing on the church steps. Thought of Marcus holding himself still because she had asked him with her eyes. Thought of all the people who would later say they were shocked, as if shock had ever protected anyone. You should have let your fiancé handle this, Caleb said after a moment, voice casual in a way that was not casual at all. People get themselves into trouble when they try to sound smarter than the situation. Naomi almost smiled, not from amusement, but from recognition. There it was. The little doorway men like him always opened by mistake. They believed intelligence had a dress code, authority had a complexion, dignity had to ask permission. My fiancé is not my attorney, she said, and I do not need a man to translate my rights into language you respect. Caleb's eyes flashed in the mirror. Careful. I am being careful. That is why I am speaking clearly. The cruiser passed the courthouse square, where the American flag lifted and fell in the humid breeze. For the first time since leaving the church, Naomi turned fully toward the window. The courthouse rose 2 stories above the lawn, pale stone, tall columns, brass doors polished by decades of hands. On the front steps, workers were removing an old framed notice from the public board. She knew what notice it was. She had signed the final acceptance papers that morning in a quiet chamber with 3 witnesses, 1 clerk, and no cameras. Her official introduction was supposed to be announced Monday, after her wedding weekend, a small courtesy from the district attorney to let her have one peaceful day before stepping into a storm. Caleb followed her gaze, but did not understand it. Pretty building, he said. People around here take the law seriously. Naomi looked back at him. No, some people around here take power seriously. The law is different. The sentence changed the air in the car. Caleb tightened both hands on the wheel now. You have an answer for everything. Only for things I have survived before. He turned into the police station parking lot, the tires rolling over loose gravel with a dry crunch. Naomi saw 2 officers near the entrance look up, their expressions shifting when they noticed the wedding dress in the back seat. One lowered his coffee cup slowly. Caleb parked near the side door instead of the front. Of course he did. Less public, less messy, less visible. Naomi waited while he stepped out and opened her door. The sunlight rushed in, warm and white, catching the beadwork on her sleeves. Caleb reached for her arm, but she stepped out before he could guide her, careful, balanced, dignified. For a second, even he had to move aside. Naomi stood in the parking lot of the station in her wedding dress, wrists cuffed, chin lifted, and looked directly at the building as if she had arrived not as a suspect, but as a warning. Before we go inside, she said, turning toward the camera on Caleb's chest, I am again requesting that all recordings be preserved, including church security footage, body camera footage, dispatch audio, and station intake video. Caleb stared at her. One of the officers by the door stopped pretending not to listen. Naomi continued, softer now, but every word landed. Because when this is reviewed, the question will not be whether I owned that car. You already know I did. The question will be why you needed me in cuffs before you were willing to believe it. Caleb's face hardened, but something uncertain moved behind his eyes. Not guilt yet, not understanding, just the first small crack in the certainty he had worn like armor. He gestured toward the side entrance. Inside, Naomi walked ahead of him, the hem of her dress whispering over the concrete, and the station doors opened to a room that had no idea its balance of power had already begun to shift. The intake room went quiet in the strange way public rooms go quiet when everyone knows something is wrong, but nobody wants to be the first to say it. A ceiling fan turned slowly above the front desk, pushing warm air across the smell of printer ink, old coffee, and floor cleaner. Naomi stood just inside the side entrance, her wedding dress bright against the dull gray walls, her wrists still held together in front of her, her veil resting over one shoulder like a piece of morning sunlight that had followed her into the wrong building. 3 officers looked up from their desks. One of them, a young black officer with a half-finished sandwich in front of him, stared at Caleb first, then at Naomi, and something in his expression tightened. Caleb noticed and lifted his chin. Vehicle theft verification, he said before anyone asked. Possible false ownership claim. Naomi turned her head slightly. Dispatch already confirmed ownership. The young officer's eyes moved to Caleb again. Caleb set his jaw and guided Naomi toward a metal bench near the wall. Sit. Naomi remained standing for one measured second, not defiant enough to be accused of resisting, not obedient enough to let the room forget she was a person. Then she sat carefully, gathering the fabric of her dress so it would not drag across the stained floor. The lace brushed against the bench with a soft whisper. A clerk behind the counter glanced at the registration in Caleb's hand. Is that hers? Caleb did not answer right away. He walked to the desk, lowered his voice, and began speaking in fragments Naomi could still hear. Stolen vehicle complaint. Unusual circumstances. Luxury car. Church event. Need to verify identity. The clerk frowned. Identification. Caleb paused. Naomi spoke from the bench. My driver's license is in the small ivory purse inside the passenger seat of my car. My passport card is in the same purse. My bar card is in the folder on the front seat. My court credentials are in the sealed envelope beneath it. The word court changed the room's temperature. Not dramatically, just enough. A pen stopped clicking. A chair creaked. The young black officer looked down at the floor, then back up at her with new attention. Caleb gave a dry laugh. Court credentials now. Naomi looked at him, calm as glass. Yes. Convenient. Documented. The clerk reached for the phone. Caleb leaned closer. Do not call anyone yet. That was the mistake. It was small, but the room felt it. The clerk's hand froze above the receiver. Naomi felt her pulse steady. Caleb was no longer investigating. He was managing exposure. He turned back to her and forced a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. Miss Brooks, you can make this easier by admitting there was confusion. Naomi's gaze lifted to the body camera. There was no confusion on my part. Someone reported the car. Then record the caller's name. That is not how this works. It is when a lawful detention depends on a report you refuse to identify after the vehicle comes back clean. The young officer's sandwich sat untouched. From somewhere deeper in the station came the muffled ring of a phone, followed by a laugh that died as another officer passed the doorway and saw the bride on the bench. Naomi's mother had once told her that humiliation had a sound. Not loud, not cruel laughter. The real sound of humiliation was ordinary life continuing around your pain, as if the world could not be bothered to pause. She heard it now in the printer warming up, in the vending machine humming, in Caleb tapping her registration against the desk. You speak like a lawyer, he said. Naomi's expression did not change. That should not be a problem in a police station. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so the others would have to pretend they were not listening. Around here, people know my family. They know I do not bring someone in unless I have a reason. Naomi looked at him then, really looked at him, and understood the shape of the man in front of her. He was not only wearing a badge. He was wearing every favor ever done for him, every complaint softened, every warning buried, every dinner table where his father-in-law's name had been spoken like protection. Officer Whitmore, she said, your family name is not probable cause. The silence afterward was complete. Caleb's face flushed beneath the station lights, not with shame, but with the heat of being challenged by someone he had expected to frighten. He turned sharply toward the clerk. Start intake. The clerk hesitated. For what charge? Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time all morning, words failed him in front of witnesses. Naomi sat very still, white dress folded around her, wrists resting on her lap, the faint red line from the cuffs visible beneath the lace. She did not smile. She did not celebrate the crack forming in his authority. She only breathed, slow and even, while the station around her began to understand that the problem was no longer the car. The problem was the man who could not admit the car had never been stolen. For a while, nobody moved. The intake room held its breath around Naomi Brooks, as if the walls themselves were waiting for Caleb Whitmore to find a charge that did not exist. The ceiling fan clicked once every few seconds, a tired little sound above the front desk. Somewhere beyond the glass partition, a copier warmed up and released a sheet of paper with a soft mechanical sigh. Naomi lowered her eyes to her wrists. The cuffs rested against the lace of her sleeves, not cruel in their pressure, but loud in their meaning. A thin red line had appeared where the metal met her skin, bright against the brown warmth of her hands and the clean white of her wedding dress. She had spent weeks choosing that dress. Her mother had cried when the tailor pinned the hem. Marcus had not seen it yet, not fully, not the way he was supposed to see it when the doors opened and everyone stood. Now the fabric sat folded across a police station bench, catching dust from a floor that smelled faintly of bleach and old rain. Naomi closed her eyes. She could still hear the church bells in her memory, slow and silver, ringing over the town square. She imagined Marcus standing outside the station by now, calling attorneys, calling her mother, forcing himself to stay calm, because panic would give men like Caleb another story to tell. She imagined her bouquet in the passenger seat of the Mercedes, the white roses beginning to soften in the heat, her father's cuff links hidden in the ribbon, waiting like a blessing interrupted. Her father used to tell her that anger was a match, useful for seeing in the dark, dangerous if you carried it too long. She had not understood that at 12. She understood it now. Anger was there, of course. It moved beneath her ribs, hot and alive. But she did not let it hold the wheel. Across the room, Caleb spoke in a low voice with the desk sergeant, his gestures sharper than necessary. Every few seconds his eyes flicked toward her, searching for weakness, for regret, for any sign that she might make this easier by becoming the kind of person he had already decided she was. Naomi gave him stillness instead. Not empty stillness. Not surrender. The kind of stillness that made other people hear themselves. The young black officer finally stood from his desk and walked to the water cooler. He filled a small paper cup, hesitated, then carried it toward the bench. Caleb noticed immediately. "Leave it," he said. The officer stopped. Naomi lifted her gaze. And in that brief pause something passed between them that did not need words. He knew. Maybe not all of it. Not her name. Not the courthouse papers. Not the private ceremony that morning where she had raised her right hand and sworn to serve the law without fear or favor. But he knew enough. He knew what it looked like when procedure became a mask. He set the cup on the counter instead, close enough for everyone to see it, too far for her to reach. Naomi looked at the water, then back at Caleb. She did not ask for it. She would not turn basic decency into another request to be denied. The station clock clicked to 11:48. 18 minutes past the wedding time. 18 minutes since she should have been walking toward Marcus under soft music and stained glass light. Her phone, sealed somewhere in the front of her car, would be full of messages. Her guests would be whispering. Her mother would be trying not to cry. The thought pressed against Naomi's chest, and for the first time that morning her breath trembled. She turned her face slightly toward the wall, letting the veil hide the small crack in her composure. Not because tears were shameful, but because this room had not earned them. She inhaled once. For seconds. Held it. Released it. The fan clicked overhead. The body camera blinked red on Caleb's chest. The cup of water sat untouched on the counter. And in that quiet, Naomi remembered the oath from that morning, the one spoken in a small chamber before the town knew her name. "I will administer justice without respect to persons, and do equal right to the poor and to the rich." She opened her eyes. The words did not make her powerful. They made her responsible. Caleb turned from the desk, holding a clipboard now, trying to rebuild authority from paper. "Last chance to make a statement before we proceed," he said. Naomi looked up at him, her voice soft, level, almost gentle. "I already made one. You just have not understood it yet." The front doors opened before he could answer, and a current of outside heat swept through the station. carrying with it the distant sound of traffic, church bells, and footsteps that did not hesitate. The woman who entered the station did not hurry, and that was what made everyone look up. District Attorney Evelyn Hart moved through the front doors with 2 courthouse officers behind her, her gray suit unwrinkled despite the summer heat, her silver hair pinned neatly at the back of her head, her expression carrying the calm weight of someone used to walking into rooms where excuses came first and truth came later. The desk sergeant straightened before he seemed to realize he had done it. The clerk lowered the phone. Caleb turned with the clipboard still in his hand, irritation flashing across his face before recognition forced it down. "Madam District Attorney," he said, smoothing his voice. "We are handling a vehicle verification issue." Evelyn did not answer him at first. Her eyes moved past him, past the desks, past the half-filled forms, until they found Naomi sitting on the bench in her wedding dress with cuffs at her wrists and lace gathered carefully over her knees. For 1 second, Evelyn's face changed. Not much, just enough for the whole room to feel the temperature drop. "Remove those cuffs," she said. Caleb blinked. "We are still sorting out the facts." Evelyn turned to him then. The facts were sorted out when dispatch confirmed ownership. The young black officer looked down, but Naomi saw his shoulders loosen. Caleb held up the clipboard as if paper could still protect him. "There was a complaint." "From whom?" Evelyn asked. Caleb's mouth tightened. "Anonymous caller." "Documented." Silence. Evelyn took 1 step closer. "Recorded." Caleb looked toward the desk sergeant, then back at her. "It should be in dispatch. Then preserve it." Her voice stayed low, but every officer in the room heard the command inside it. Caleb shifted his weight. "With respect, this is a department matter." Evelyn's eyes went cold. "With respect, Officer Whitmore, this became my matter the moment you brought a sitting judge into this station in cuffs without probable cause." The room stopped breathing. Caleb's face emptied first, then tightened as if he had misunderstood the language itself. "Eh, what?" Evelyn did not look at him. She walked to Naomi, stopped in front of the bench, and her voice softened without losing its authority. "Your Honor, I am deeply sorry." The words landed harder than any shout could have. The clerk's hand flew to her mouth. The desk sergeant stared at Naomi as if the white dress had suddenly become a robe. The young officer stood a little straighter. Caleb looked from Evelyn to Naomi, then to the registration still lying on the counter, and the name that had irritated him before now struck with full force. Naomi Elaine Brooks. Not just an attorney, not just a bride. The woman sworn in that morning in chambers, quietly and legally, as the new judge assigned to replace Harold Whitmore after the federal ethics review. Harold Whitmore, Caleb's father-in-law. The old kingdom had not paused. It had ended. Naomi rose slowly from the bench, the cuffs still on her wrists, her dress falling around her like gathered light. Evelyn turned sharply toward the desk sergeant. "Now." The sergeant moved at once, retrieving the key with hands that suddenly seemed too large for the small ring. Caleb stepped forward as if to speak, then stopped when Naomi looked at him. She did not glare. She did not smile. That was worse. Her calm gave him nothing to fight and nowhere to hide. The sergeant unlocked the cuffs, and the metal opened with a small click that seemed to echo through the whole station. Naomi rubbed one wrist gently, the red line visible beneath the lace. Evelyn's eyes flicked to it, then back to Caleb. "Body camera footage, station intake video, dispatch audio, church security footage, and all written notes will be preserved immediately." Caleb swallowed. I did not know who she was. Naomi finally spoke, her voice quiet enough to make everyone lean toward it. "That is not the defense you think it is." Caleb's lips parted, but no words came. Outside, a siren passed somewhere far away, fading into the heat. Inside, the station remained still around Naomi Brooks, because every person there understood at the same time that the mistake was not that Caleb had arrested a judge. The mistake was that he had believed a black woman needed to be important before she deserved to be believed. Caleb stared at the open cuffs in the sergeant's hand as if they belonged to someone else's memory. A few minutes earlier, they had been proof of his control. Now they looked small, cheap, and impossible to explain. Naomi stood in the center of the intake room, gently smoothing the lace over her wrists, not hiding the red marks, not displaying them either. She simply let them exist. District Attorney Evelyn Hart placed a sealed folder on the counter. "Internal Affairs has been notified," she said. The State Judicial Conduct Liaison has been notified. The chief will be here in 10 minutes. Until then, Officer Whitmore, you will surrender your body camera and remain available for questioning." Caleb's face tightened. "This is excessive." Evelyn looked at him without blinking. "No. Excessive was transporting a verified vehicle owner from her wedding to a police station because you did not like the answer the database gave you." The words settled over the room like dust after a door slammed. Caleb looked toward the desk sergeant, then the clerk, then the young black officer, searching for the familiar softness people usually offered when his name was attached to trouble. He found none. For the first time that morning, Harold Whitmore's shadow did not cover him. Naomi saw the moment it reached him. His posture changed. His shoulders dropped a fraction. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Judge Brooks," he said, and the title sounded awkward in his voice, like a language he had never practiced. "I did not know." Naomi held his gaze. "You have said that already." "I mean, I did not know you were the new judge. I understood you the first time." Caleb swallowed, and something like fear finally moved across his face. Not the fear of truth. Not yet. The fear of consequence. "I apologize for the misunderstanding." Naomi let the silence stretch long enough for the apology to reveal itself. It was clean on the outside and empty in the middle. She looked down once at her wrists, then back at him. A misunderstanding is when two people hear the same words differently. This was not that. Caleb's eyes flickered toward Evelyn. "Then what would you call it?" Naomi's voice stayed calm, almost tired. "A decision. You made one at the church before you read the registration. You made another when dispatch confirmed my name, and you kept going. You made another when you brought me here instead of admitting you were wrong. Do not shrink it now because the room has changed." No one spoke. Even the copiers seemed to have gone still. Caleb's face lost color slowly, the way sunlight leaves a wall at dusk. He glanced at the body camera in his hand, its little red light no longer blinking. "What happens now?" Evelyn answered first. "That depends on the review." Naomi lifted one hand slightly, and Evelyn stopped. Not because Naomi demanded it, but because authority had moved quietly back where it belonged. "What happens now," Naomi said, "is the same thing that should have happened at the church. The facts will be preserved. The record will be complete. No favors. No phone calls to make this disappear. No family name large enough to stand between the law and the truth." Caleb looked as though he wanted to argue, but every argument he had used all morning had already collapsed. The anonymous call, the suspicious circumstance, the confusion in the system. Each one lay exposed under the fluorescent lights. Naomi stepped closer, not enough to intimidate him, only enough to make sure he heard her as a person and not a title. "I will not use my position to punish you because you humiliated me," she said. "That would make power the same in different hands. But I will not protect you from the consequences of what you chose. That would make the robe meaningless before I ever wear it in court." The young black officer looked at her then with something deeper than respect. Evelyn's expression softened. Caleb lowered his eyes for the first time. It was not redemption. It was only the beginning of recognition, and beginnings were fragile things. The front doors opened again, and Marcus Reed entered with Naomi's mother beside him. Marcus stopped when he saw Naomi standing free, then crossed the room with careful restraint, as if one sudden movement might break the thin line holding everyone together. He did not ask if she was all right. He knew the answer was too large for the room. He simply took her hands, saw the marks beneath the lace, and closed his fingers around them with a gentleness that made Naomi's breath catch. Her mother touched her veil, straightening the edge the way she had planned to do in the bridal room. "Baby," she whispered, voice trembling. Naomi leaned into that one word for half a second, then stood straight again. Evelyn picked up Naomi's bouquet, which someone had brought from the car, the white roses slightly wilted at the edges but still alive. She handed it to her without ceremony. Naomi accepted it, then turned back to Caleb one last time. "Officer Whitmore," she said, "the next time someone tells you who they are, believe the documents before your assumptions. Better yet, believe their humanity before both." Caleb did not answer. He only stood there in the bright, unforgiving room, watching the woman he had tried to reduce to a suspect walk toward the door as a bride, a judge, and a witness to the truth he could no longer control. The station doors closed behind Naomi Brooks with a soft hydraulic sigh, and the sound felt larger than it should have. Outside, the sunlight was still waiting. The same Georgia heat shimmered above the parking lot. The same crepe myrtles leaned over the sidewalk. The same town moved around them, as if an entire life had not been interrupted between 11:26 and noon. Marcus stood beside her, one hand around hers, careful not to touch the red lines beneath the lace unless she wanted him to. Her mother walked on Naomi's other side, carrying the edge of the veil where it had dragged against the station floor. No one spoke for the first 30 steps. Words would have made the moment smaller. Near the curb, the white Mercedes waited under the sun, still shining, still hers, the bouquet ribbon fluttering faintly through the open window. Naomi stopped beside the car and looked at her reflection in the glass. Her dress was creased. One pearl pin had slipped loose from her hair. The roses in her hand had softened at the edges, and the court envelope on the passenger seat sat exactly where she had left it, sealed, official, untouched by all the assumptions that had tried to rewrite her morning. Marcus opened the passenger door, then paused. "Do you want to go home?" he asked. Naomi looked across the square toward the church steeple rising over the trees. The bells were silent now, but she could still feel them in her chest. Her mother wiped one tear from the corner of her eye and said nothing. Naomi breathed in slowly. For seconds. Hold. For seconds out. Then she said, "No, I am getting married today." When they returned to the church, the guests were still there. Some stood outside under the oak trees. Some sat in the pews with programs folded in their hands. The photographer lowered his camera when he saw her, not out of pity, but respect. One by one, people stood. No applause came at first. Only the rustle of fabric, the soft scrape of shoes against wood, the collective stillness of witnesses who now understood that this wedding had become something more than a ceremony. Naomi stepped through the open doors, and the stained glass light fell across her dress in blue, gold, and crimson, touching the marks at her wrists until they looked less like injury and more like testimony. Marcus walked to the altar and waited, his eyes shining but steady. Naomi's mother fixed the veil one last time, then placed the bouquet back in her daughter's hands. Hidden beneath the ribbon, her father's cuff links pressed gently against Naomi's palm. She felt them there and almost smiled. Not because the mourning had been repaired. Some things could not be repaired by returning to where they were. They could only be carried forward honestly. At the back of the church, District Attorney Evelyn Hart stood quietly near the last pew, not as an official now, but as a witness. Across town, in a silent office with fluorescent lights and closed blinds, Caleb Whitmore sat without his body camera, without his clipboard, without the protection of certainty. On the desk before him lay a printed copy of the dispatch report, clean and simple, proving what Naomi had said from the beginning. The car was hers. The mistake was his. He read the line again, and for the first time, there was no family name in the room loud enough to cover it. Back in the church, Naomi began walking. Each step was slow, not because she was weak, but because she wanted to feel the floor beneath her. The aisle stretched only 50 feet, but it held every hallway she had survived, every courthouse where she had waited, every door that had once opened too late. Marcus reached for her hand when she arrived, and this time, no one stood between them. The minister looked at Naomi gently, waiting to see if she was ready. She nodded. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but unbroken. Outside, the cruiser lights were gone. Inside, sunlight moved across the pews like a blessing. And when Naomi placed her hand in Marcus's, the church remained silent for one perfect second, the kind of silence that does not hide injustice, but finally lets justice be heard.